Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And yes, this is another update on my Malazan read-through. And we're beginning to read Book 4 of the Bonehunters. It's also called the Bonehunters, so it's easy to remember. And I'm back with the knitting update. My scarf is getting longer. I can already put it around my neck and start knitting it, knotting it in front. That's where we are right now. I'm, still slower at the knitting this time around than I was with the last scarf because stuff happening. And if you ever try to actually mail out over 100 packages and try to deal with postal service websites for all these addresses, it's not fun. I'm almost done though. Well, not almost done. I'm like 50% through, and gonna do the rest while I'm editing this video, I guess, and hopefully pack all that stuff so we can drop it off. I can drop it off at the post office. I might even show a picture of the whole thing. It's already like something of a small wall of packages. Well, anyway, this is not me talking about logistics of small-time underground labels. This is me talking about Malazans. So let's do that. Cheers. And yes, chapters, what are they, 17 and 18? Yes, those are the ones that I read today. It's not that much, but I want to read the next couple tomorrow. Probably, maybe. We'll see, but I'm going to talk about them on Monday. Tomorrow's going to be something else, and Sunday as well. We'll see what it's going to be. Anyway, what makes this one an interesting part is because now we've reached the point where Steven Erikson manages to actually connect a lot of the strands that he has started in all these different books before. We see where all these elements of Midnight Tides and the Bone Hunters and even bits of House of Chains, how all of those kind of connect and are at least moving in the right direction. And by right direction, I mean in the same direction, so we can see the actual end game. And end game is obviously there's no such thing as an end game right now, but we can see the Tist Edur ruled Lether Empire and the Malazan Empire, or at least the Bone Hunters army, are kind of on something of a collision course there. We also see that Karsa Orlong is on his way to the Lether Empire. Ikariam is on his way to the Lether Empire. We still haven't figured out how Mappa's gonna get there, or if Mappa's gonna get there. He's still somewhere with a lot of Bokarala and Sister Spite. That's a tale for a different day, though. And Erikson does that by, picking up threads bit by bit. So we start out, we meet Baniskar again. And this time we actually have him as a point of view character, and we see how, it has actually, the toll the whole situation about Burn has taken on him, because he seems to be drinking himself into as much self-destruction or what have you as possible. And he meets someone in that bar, in Coop's bar, that is an interesting character because he's really huge, he's brawny, and he has these scars and wheals on his hands, and he says that drowning is not something that he's completely unfamiliar with. And now we can all go back and think of how many large drowned and revived huge people with scars and wheals on their hands we have met so far. And turns out there is one that left an island not that long too long ago. And so that's how deftly Erikson manages to weave those strands together. He starts with characters that we have not met too many times, or not too deeply, too closely, and they start meeting each other. We also meet other characters in the city in on Malaz Island. So we see that Malaz Island is sort of the place where things are brewing. We have had like first inklings of rumors in the Malazan Empire being stirred against the events on Seven Cities, against the Wiccans in particular, and we see more of that in these chapters. Now, this is an interesting aspect because we've spoken before about the idea of using scapegoats. Using scapegoats within the to keep the status quo working, to keep the ruling group in power and so forth. We've seen that before. Most famously at the beginning of Deadhouse Gates, right, where we have the call of the nobility. Apparently, purges like that are something that still continues. Like you keep the rage of the populace focused on some place where they can vent it, and thus they will not actually question you while you are in power. Now, does that sound familiar to things that happen in the real world? Well, of course it does, and that's an important aspect there, because you don't have to be like go all out and start questioning Stephen Erickson's political views or anything, but the fact that a lot of racism, this is racism basically in this case, racism or classism, the rage of the disenfranchised against an even weaker group or a very small group, that you direct that rage that way to keep it away from actually changing political systems. That's something that we find all over the place. And yeah, I am not going to go commenting on too deeply on that at this point, but yeah, that's something that happens. Now the question here is, and it's left pretty open so far, like whether this is this time around actually directed by Lessine, the Empress, or if it's just happening in another way. And we obviously have an idea who might just be the person doing that, because we have that meeting between Pearl and Malik Rel. Our good buddy Malik Rel is back again. Well, he's not completely back, but he's apparently more active than people might think. And see, this is an interesting question that I kind of feel we probably need to talk about in the distant future, because I don't want to spoil anything right now. But at some point we need to talk about motivations for the quest for power, like the drive for power within different characters within the Malazan Empire. Now we know that Lessine took over the throne for specific reasons. We probably need to talk about those at some point, but not right now. But the question there is, why do people actually want to rule that fucking empire? Because it's not exactly a fun job, is it? Being emperor sucks most of the time. Which is why Kellen, Venn, and Dancer just left it to Surly to manage, because conquering shit is fun, and then the day-to-day actual administration, that's boring shit. You have to, like me, like signing bands and releasing their albums is a lot of fun. It's great. It makes you feel good. And then you realize that it also means that you have to actually copy and paste shipping addresses into a boring website and print out shipping labels and package, pack packages and trudge to the post office and drop them off and all of that. That's not fun. Same with like empire building, being out there, being cool magicers or assassins and conquering places and seeing new places. That's fun. Sitting in the palace in Unter or Malaz Island and going through paperwork, that sucks, right? Anyway, quick aside here. It's the why Lord Vetinari is such an unrealistic person in the Terry Pratchett stories. Anyway, we're not going to talk about that one here either. So yeah, we see Malaz Island rearing its ugly head, and there's even that discussion about certain specific places having a very important, like almost mythical, magical role within the psychology or psyche of a nation, of an empire, of a continent, of a region. Is like this idea is like you have Igatan for that in Seven Cities, where all the big historical events, or those that are remembered as really big, those tend to happen in this place. That place is just this one mythical geographical location that then gets remembered for all kinds of things. That's an interesting aspect about geography. And I actually recorded a video a while ago that I never uploaded on geography as actually a character. I might actually have to redo that video when I have like more like smarter thoughts on it. As if I ever. No, what I was going to say is the idea that the Malazan Empire is focused on Malaz in that way, and not, for example, at Unter, at the capital. It's Malaz Island, that ugly place where it all starts and everything returns to again and again and again in these circles. And that's interesting to look at, because by telling us that these places exist and have that, in like the ruminations of slightly drunk Banniskar. What Erickson does there is basically already foreshadows that something big's going to go down in Malaz Island, because suddenly we're talking about Malaz again, as we did at the end of Deadhouse Gates, and now we're like a couple of books later and we're going back to Malaz Island. So what's going to happen there? We don't know yet, but something's going to go there, going to happen there. Not everything seems to be all peachy with the Empire, apparently. Malik Rel has apparently built this power base, and a larger power base. And this is something that I find interesting. The way Malik Rel as a character changes from being this almost, dislikable guy at the beginnings of Deadhouse Gates, who has apparently manipulated his place into a position of power over Pormqual and nothing more. And now we realize that it's obviously not a lot more. And like, if you or me, if we all as readers would have been smart, we would have realized that manipulating your way into a position of power over the high fist of all of Seven Cities takes more than just being a nice guy or a likable drinking fellow. No, you have to have, people in power. And so you don't go there, talk to the guy, and suddenly you're his best friend. That's not how that works. So obviously Malik Rel needs to have had an organization behind him. And there's even like mention of that in Deadhouse Gates, but it's super easy, at least for me, it was super easy to ignore that fact in those moments when it's actually mentioned. And yeah. Now it's made very much more plain and obvious that is the case, and the guy has a power base. Also, it's kind of interesting to look at, because what it shows is that in the situation at the beginnings of Deadhouse Gates, when Coltane and Bolt just like insult Malik Rel to send him away and make him angry, it shows that conflict, that question of how these two different ways of dealing with conflict, because Malik Rel is a politician. He's like the archetypal politician. Kellanved was not. Lassine is probably not. I don't know. I don't want to talk too much about Lassine because we are only in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and she's much bigger in the novel of the Malazan Empire, so I don't want to spoil or anything. But the point is, Malik Rel is a politician. What he does is collects influence over people. He deals in favors and influence and stuff like that. Coltane disregards that. And that's a very important aspect there in Deadhouse Gates that I kind of didn't talk about back then, so I'm going to mention it today, but that's the point. Coltane doesn't play Malik Rel's game. And now you have two different worldviews, I guess, but also, and two people that just fundamentally just ignore the game of the other person. no, obviously Coltrane is dead and Malik Rel has his power base going on. So there's a comment there on which game is under the circumstances the better game to play, I guess. But that's because Coltrane tried to operate within the Malazan Empire. Well, he didn't care in the end because his goals were rather limited. Malik Rel is playing a different game there. So yeah, just a swift aside that I kind of felt interested, like was reminded of when I was reading it today. So yeah, what else is there? Yeah, we have both Karsa and Samar Dev on the one ship, one test ship, and we have Icarium and Terralag Veed on the other one. And so there's one thing I might want to think about a bit is like how those two couples, let's call them couples at this point. You have the couple of Karsa and Samar Dev, and you have that group of Icarium and it used to be Icarium Mappo, now it's Icarium Terralag Veed. And the interesting thing there is that in general, each has like a reluctant character and an eager character in each of those, like, teams. And that's interesting because on the one hand, it's Karsa Orlung. He is the absolutely eager, bloodthirsty, assertive, active part of that pair there, I guess. And the dynamic is very much him deciding to do shit and Samar Dev following. On the other hand, it used to be the same way with Icarium and Mappo. It's like Icarium decides to do something, dig a hole somewhere, find ochre potsherds to stare at and not remember what they were all about. And Mappo's the reluctant one who knows shit, just like Samar Dev, and tries to kind of steer Icarium. Now that dynamic has shifted because Icarium's the reluctant one, and Terralag Veed is trying to Veed. I always want to say weed, and I think him like smoking, but he's not. So anyway, Terralag is the eager one who tries to actively steer Icarium, and Icarium is the one who's just basically following and not doing anything at this point, which I don't want to take too much out of that. I just feel that you could read it in a way that the dynamic is fundamentally wrong between Terralag Veed and Icarium, and it was fundamentally okay during the before that, because when you look outside of that, usually in most cases, when you look at your personal friendships, like your best friends, it's usually you have like the one person in a personal like friendship. I don't want to go into a relationship, and like a personal friendship, it's usually you have like one person who is the more assertive, active, I don't want to say active, but more assertive sounds good. More assertive kind of person. And then you have the other person who is sort of the person in a friendship, usually, who is a bit more thoughtful, a bit more responsible, in a way, trying to make sure that the over-eager imagination and over-eager enthusiasm of the other person doesn't always get them into too much trouble. That's a very, very common dynamic, and it works rather well. I would say it's like it works rather well most of the time, and I feel what we see there is that the dynamic is broken with Terralag and Icarium, because Icarium doesn't know how to be the reluctant, more thoughtful person. He can't, even because his memory is fucked up. His memory is broken. So that dynamic will lead to disaster sooner or later, because that friendship well, it's not exactly a friendship there, but that relationship is fundamentally flawed now. It was not flawed during the time it was, well, it was still problematic because of all the surrounding, but the personal dynamic between just the persons in everyday life between Mappo and Ikariam worked as a friendship, because you had that kind of dynamic of complementing strengths in a way. And that is no longer the case, because Terralag and Ikariam don't complement their individual strengths or moods and stuff like that anymore. So that's just something that I felt interesting on the more like day-to-day kind of thing. So yeah, those people who say that big contemporary serious literary fiction is all about exploring human dynamics and stuff like that, and fantasy is all about telling stories, well, nope. See, you can actually explore like human dynamics and the soul just as well if you want to in fantasy stories, which is cool. So we have that bit, which I totally didn't plan to talk about until I just, did. So let's look at the next big thing that I find interesting. The Eresal taking a more active role within the events, especially when it comes to taking a more active role in the fate of the 14th Army, the Bonehunters. Apparently, she has a pretty firm grip on how things are proceeding there, I guess. But she's taken a very active hand there, laced with bottle. Anyway, what I was trying to say is what that shows is that there is something more outside of just the Malazan army doing its job at play. And it has to be for a long time, because we know the Eresal first shows up during House of Chains in a bunch of places. And the question there is why would a sort of time-traveling proto-human actually bother with which is in like on the surface just internal politics of a human empire. What's her stake in all of that? And that's, I guess, the question that we sort of need to look at. The answer would probably be that internal strife within the Malazan Empire, and especially the fate of the 14th Army, has significance far outside that. Now, we know the gods are at war and there's a lot of shit going down. We have kind of figured out at this point that the crippled god might be kind of central to that, with meta-knowledge that we all kind of have, because we probably need to figure out which book to buy and so forth. We know that the crippled god is the name of the last novel, so we kind of expect at this point the crippled god is important. We have learned about that whole war amongst the gods. But why does someone like the Eresal bother with that? Yes, she's sort of the goddess of the Nerek, remember that? But apart from that, all the Eres are dead. They've been dead forever and ever and ever, like even before the Talani Mass. So we need to figure out why there is that involvement and what it means. And I don't know why. I don't know what it does. But we've seen Fiddler getting his like new deck of dragons, which has a lot of cards in there that other people don't know. It's like a very specific one. So we'll have to see what comes with that, or comes out of that, because that's gonna be fun and interesting for everyone except Fiddler, I guess. But yeah, there's that. We have that big confrontation that tells us a lot of stuff, like that confrontation between the Malazan forces and the Tist Edur forces. For the first time, those two collide, actually. And it's like, the next part, like where you see those strands of those different stories melding and merging further into that, like, headlong rush of the next of the overall history of the Malazan world, I guess, is obviously that big battle that is not a battle where you just have the mage duel and Quick Ben does Quick Ben things and then Bottle helps him, and then the Eresal once again takes a very active hand in all of that, and they get through. Why is that important? Because we see Quickben doing an essential Quickben number, which is starting to just bluff his way out of there by pretending to use Elder Magic, which he claims is an illusion, and then Bottle kind of joins him in doing that in a way, and then the Aerosol just turns it into actual Elder Magic, and then yes, you've read the thing at this point, I hope. So there's that. Which shows us once again, yeah, the essential quick bendness, although he has become more blunt at this point than in earlier books where he was more about trickery and actually not using magic if possible and stuff like that. He's more open with his magic now, I guess. But it also can't really be helped. The other thing, though, is we see, and I find this there's a bunch of things that I found very interesting. One, the dynamic between Samardev and Featherwitch. Because this is like the first time we have a longer view at Featherwitch from someone who has no emotional investment yet. Because all our looks at Featherwitch, like all our longer looks at Featherwitch and her character and so forth, were through Udinas, who is, for all his claims of seeing things oh so clear, is one of the more unreliable narrators in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, I think. Now we have Samardev, and she doesn't like Featherwitch, and she realizes a lot of things about Featherwitch that, yeah, characterize her rather well, I feel. So there's that. Just, a bit on the side, but that's not exactly what I wanted to talk about. The other thing is that bit of world building that was dropped in there, like backstory stuff that was dropped in there in that discussion between Tarlag Weed and Ian Tovis and Alrada Am, which gives us so much information because we now know who was the magician, like the captain and sorcerer on board of the Silanda, who's dead. It was obviously Bineda Sengar. We also know that he was sent into the Nascent to find Tral Sengar, which he obviously failed at because things. And what I find interesting, this is something that I kind of need to figure out, because I may have misunderstood the bit there because of just language issues. And I rechecked, but it's like Jan Tovis talks to what's his name, to Tarlag Weed, and says that Binada Sangar was sent into the Nascent on a mission the Emperor would not be told about. And so I'm trying to figure out, does that mean Tomad sent Benedas to find Troll, to actually bring Troll back to maybe have control over Rulad? Or did Rulad decide it and others tried to keep him from doing that? And I'm just confused because I'm stupid and I don't know languages and shit. But yeah. Anyway, so Tomad thinks that Binadaz and Troll are dead, which, he's 50% right. That's not bad. I've been wrong 100%, so that's good. But yeah, so we see more of that whole stuff from the past making sense now. We also learn, and this is one thing that has bothered me before, or like had bothered me for a time, and I didn't talk about it because I was almost certain that I just had missed something. And my issue was back at the beginning of House of Chains. They're all standing there, like we have that scene with the shawning of Troll Sengar, and we have someone who is obviously Rulad, I guess, and does this whole like brothers, no, and it's always the talk is always about brothers, and they all answer, and I'm like, okay, so he has 3 brothers, and then Fear just walks away at the end of Midnight Tides, and Troll goes back to Rulad, which means there could only be one brother. Now, we now know that it's like his like bloodkin, or not bloodkin, but he has decided that some of the younger or whatever Tist Edur are his brothers. You know, those chosen warriors that the Boons were part of, that and all of that. But now we have confirmation that that was the case because Alrada An remembers it. So there's that bit that I was just like wondering about when I was reading it. It's also explained. Just once more, one of those situations where you read the Malazanov Book of the Fallen, so many of the seeming inconsistencies are kind of solved and resolved later on, which I find just, well done there. So yeah, there's that. What else did I want to talk about today? I feel that's sort of most of it for today. So yeah, not too many super deep philosophy things. We might have to talk about the whole idea of liberation of slaves, but I want to think a bit more on that before I actually go at it, maybe? I'm not sure. Like, see, so the point there is, nah, forget it. I will talk about that idea in a later video, maybe compared to some other things like the Lethery dealing with Nerek, Tarthanal, and whatnot. See, that's the point. The idea of half-bloods being worse and so forth, that's a different thing that we need to talk about at some point, but not today. I landed at this today. I'll gonna go print more shipping labels, and I'll talk to you tomorrow about something else that I'll figure out until tomorrow, I guess. So yeah, have a great Friday evening. Do something fun, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. Cheers.